Hi, I'm Christy Carson, and today I'm speaking with Erin Sullivan, who works at the Shakespeare Institute. Erin and I have known each other for quite some time, and during the Globe to Globe Festival, she was running a parallel project, which is about the entire World Shakespeare Festival, and had people involved in reviewing every single one of those productions. We had some parallel work going on there, and then she also wrote a chapter on teaching online for the digital Shakespeare volume that I did with Pete Kerwin. So I'm going to just ask you, Erin, if you don't mind, to give us a really quick snapshot of what your role is currently, what your position is, and your experience before the pandemic about online teaching.
Sure. I'm a senior lecturer at the Shakespeare Institute, which is part of the University of Birmingham, but it's based in Stratford-upon-Avon. And in addition to the research that I do at the Institute, I'm involved in quite a lot of teaching, as all my colleagues are. And I specifically focus on developing our distance learning teaching. So I've been teaching online for a long time. I've been teaching online at the Shakespeare Institute for 10 years now. I took over a set of courses that had been kind of like correspondence courses or a mix of summer classes and weekend classes that were in the process of going online, and I helped move them across and develop the sort of the online possibilities of them. And I also taught online before that when I was doing my PhD. I taught some for the Open University and for an e-studies program at Duke University.
Great. I think that's one of the things that keeps coming up in these conversations is the fact that there were, precursors to what's happening during the pandemic. And, as I've been sort of saying, working with digital resources in the classroom makes you, well, in some ways, the question, I guess, is, does it make you more prepared to go online since you already have some resources that you're relying on? How has your teaching changed since the pandemic started?
I suppose we'll really find out once we get into the next academic year. For us, the lockdown started when we had just a couple of weeks left of teaching. And the classes I was teaching, and I would say the majority of the classes we teach at the Shakespeare Institute also are taught as distance learning. So in that sense, they are already blended or bimodal courses, whatever terminology people want to use. So that helped us a lot in that there was already an online version happening. So the biggest change was for the on-site students who suddenly found themselves in the online classroom. But it was fortunate in that we didn't have to scramble to set that up. And without going into too much detail, the way that we set up most of our bimodal or blended courses is that there's a shared online classroom space that has the syllabus and the readings and discussion prompts and things like that, where students, it's kind of like a resource center online where students go, whether they're taking the class online or in person, to find what they need to do to prepare for class. And then the students who are here in Stratford come on site and have a 2-hour seminar, whereas the students who are somewhere around the world watch a recorded version of that seminar and then contribute through discussion fora. So when we went into lockdown, like I said, the biggest difference was that the on-site students became online, but also that we started, and I think we'll continue to do this, started offering more real-time online sessions that necessarily had to be optional because students, whether they're distance or they're on-site, but they might have gone home to different parts of the world. In any case, we don't know what time zone they're in, and also what else they have going on in their lives. So we offered the opportunity to have what are often called synchronous meetings through things. We weren't using Zoom at that time, but we probably will be in a few months. But also to have asynchronous opportunities to engage through recordings and discussion boards and things like that.
Okay, great. And what is the balance between distance learners and local learners, as it were?
If you're talking about numbers of students, there's definitely more distance students. But if you're talking about um, the number of classes being taken, I'm guessing it might be even because our on-site students tend to be full-time. So they're taking a full suite of courses over a year, whereas our distance learners tend to be part-time. So they're taking maybe half, but often more like 1/3 of the course load that our on-site students are taking. So if I had to break it down, I would guess that it's probably about 2/3 distance learners to 1/3 on-site students in terms of people. But then again, if you're talking about number of course registrations, I would guess that it would probably roughly even out.
Okay. And how has it changed, teaching everyone sort of, well, almost literally on the same page as opposed to in two different modes?
Um, I think we'll find out with time, because like I said, with the lockdown came in mid-March and our term ended at the end of March. So we haven't been doing regular teaching through the summer, although I mean other things we continue to do and they've all gone online, like MA supervision, PhD supervision. We're having a weekly meeting for the entire institute community, which is, potentially up, over 100 people or so. We're not getting that those sorts of numbers, but probably anywhere between 20 and 40 people every week, which isn't bad considering all the things people have going on in their lives right now. So we're doing various kinds of regular online activities, but our sort of core busy teaching activity has wrapped up for this academic year. And what we're really focused on now is trying to plan for next year, given that we, like everyone else in the world, don't really know what to expect. But I'm trying to think if I can apply your question to what we're thinking about going forward. I'm not sure, because at the moment, what we, and I think a lot of universities are trying to do, is to plan to be able to do both, to be able to teach
Right.
on-site and online, um, with the idea that you might have quite a lot of students in person, but also some online who might be self-isolating or shielding, or something along those lines. But also with the idea that if we were to go into another lockdown, whether it's a local lockdown or a nationwide one, that we could really quickly, we could keep our term going fairly seamlessly, where everyone could go online. Um, and I suppose only time will tell what it's like, kind of, if everyone's online versus a mix of the two. In a way, it's a kind of leveling of experience. We've worked really hard at the Institute so that we don't have a two-tiered system of on-site is the kind of premium experience and online is the, well, I guess you can do it that way. We've
Right.
really worked to make them, everyone, an equal part of the community, while also recognizing that the experience is just always different.
Yeah.
Um, but I suppose when everyone is online, then all of a sudden the difference kind of goes away, and that everyone is in the same boat, at least in terms of how they're studying. And that could be
And
pretty interesting. It's too soon to really be able to speculate what that might mean for students, but I do think it's made a really big difference in terms of how instructors are thinking about their teaching and what's possible, because I think um, there has just historically been a lot of skepticism about online learning. I think often because there have been schemes that are very much geared towards profit increases and things like that. So they've been seen as kind of, the extreme end of the marketization of education and all of that. And that is true, but it's not the whole story. And I think people have realized through this process that, online learning has a lot of integrity. It's just like any kind of teaching, it's about the way it's framed and how you approach it. And it can be more or less fulfilling depending on those factors.
well, I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do these interviews, was to capture this moment in a way, because, as you say, there's been a lot of resistance to online learning, and I've been very interested in it, and yet I don't have a direct role at the moment. But I'm quite fascinated to see the way that people's opinions are changing quite quickly as a result of experience. But whether or not, but the other part of it that I'm concerned about is the fact that people have been thrown in the deep end without any, a lot of people don't have any training, and the support has been limited. So I guess I'm interested in capturing people's excitement about it on the one side, but also then the hurdles and the difficulties that they face. I mean, so what do you think are the main benefits of working online, since you've done it for such a long time?
Well, certainly if you look at there's lots of different kinds of online programs, but if you look at research that's looking at different online programs more generally, uh, it's definitely the case in the research that I've looked at that online learning tends to have a more diverse student body. The specific study I'm thinking about is a little bit older now, and things might have changed now. But let's say 10 years ago, research was showing that online learning cohorts, the main difference from on-site is that they tended to be a bit older, they tended to be have a higher female population, and to have various caring and work and other sorts of responsibilities in their lives. So from my point of view, that suggests that online learning has the power to make higher education more inclusive. And, an institution like the Open University has really led the way over the past 50 plus years in that regard. They were, it's in the name, the idea of openness to education, recognition that while it is a wonderful opportunity to be able to move somewhere to study, because the very act of moving, no matter what it is you're doing, whether it's study or something else, learning a new skill, dropping an old habit, there's lots of research that shows that changing your physical location helps that process. So yeah, being able to move to a campus and become part of an immediate physical community while you undertake a new sort of activity, or pursue a new goal in your life, is really, really valuable, but it's just simply not realistic for a huge number of people around the world for a lot of different reasons. So I think online learning opens up the possibility that people can still train, pursue different goals. It can also be things that are less formalized, but online reading groups or clubs or things like that find people who have shared passions, while also, they can do that while also carrying on the lives that they either want or have to pursue. There are a lot of barriers, certainly economic, but other barriers as well, to being able to pursue higher education in the kind of traditional way. So for me, there are other benefits as well, but that's the number one benefit.
That's, yeah, and I think, my mum was doing seminars for the OU in 1970 something, and I think there was always a sense, at least in my understanding, that personal gatherings, in-person gatherings, really help to augment that, the online experience or the distance experience. And one of the things that I've been talking to people about is the difference between having a cohort that you then put online versus developing a cohort online. I think there are going to be difficulties creating that sense of community when you start with a new group.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's harder, but maybe not. I definitely don't think it's insurmountable. Um, it's kind, it's the same for loads of people who are doing video calls now. It's a lot easier, I think. The threshold for kind of emotional and cognitive entry into a meeting where you kind of already know the people is lower than one where you don't know the people at all. And I think it's the same, with teaching. It's this, but to be honest, I mean, I don't want to level. I try to be careful about not. I would never want to suggest that on-site teaching and online teaching are exactly the same, and yet I see huge parallels between the two in terms of the phenomenological experience of them as a teacher. So for me, like the first day of class, when you're going into a room in person and confronting a group of students that you've never met before, is always kind of nerve-wracking and feels sort of high stakes. And then over the few weeks, you kind of get to know them, they get to know one another, and you start to build develop a community there. And I really feel like a similar thing happens online. It is different in that, I mean, with our students, this is going to be a bit different for people who are maybe teaching first-year undergrads, but for our students who are postgrads, they have a lot of other stuff going on in their lives. They're part-time students, so you can't expect them to have the time and the commitment to community building that you might expect from freshmen or freshers. Um, Even if they have the desire, they just don't have the capacity. But I've had a lot of students over the past 10 years that I've never met in person, or maybe I've met in person once, that I feel really strongly connected to, that I've kept up correspondence with. And of course, it's always a huge joy, and it makes a huge difference when I can meet them in person. Sometimes we have students who come to the Institute, they come through the UK in the summer and they meet up with us one-on-one, or we also have kind of immersive enrichment weekends where some are able to come. Then also others I've met at conferences in the US or other things like that. and it's absolutely delightful, and nothing compares to it, and it's so nice. Um, but I don't think that it's kind of adds to the experience, and I don't think that it's absolutely necessary to have that to feel a real bond with students.
Well, and I
I
guess
think
one of the things that I'm interested in, and I'm extrapolating a little bit from your conversation, but the possibility for people to alternate between one mode and the other, the bimodal notion of, if you're ill, you can still, zoom in, or if you're, have an operation, or, a bereavement, you could still come and participate, and maybe not, have video on. So I think that idea of having, a number of different levels of engagement, rather than expecting everyone to be physically present, which is, become the norm, as you say, for the undergraduates. But I also find, well, in my experience of undergraduate teaching, that there's so much else going on that actually the concentration in the classroom is often quite low. So it could be seen as the reverse, that because, that's their 1 hour or their 2 hours of interaction with this, their course, they might actually be more focused in some way. So I guess, do you think that there are any drawbacks, though, to this form of teaching? Would you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think with online, for me personally, and I think it's the case for many others as well, the biggest challenge with online working, meeting, whatever, is the fact that it is less bounded. It's both a benefit and a liability. It's unboundedness, it's portability. It means that I can, go downstairs while my family's upstairs and kind of be working. But it also means that while I'm on screen, and this is the same for my students, it's so easy to be distracted by other things that are going on, emails that are coming in, or messages. And of course that happens in the traditional classroom as well, especially in really big lecture halls. You definitely have students on social media and messaging one another or reading other things. But I think that it just gets more and more difficult because um, you're less kind of bounded and immersed in a physical space where either you don't have access to those things, or even if you do, which is increasingly the case, there are sort of social codes that prevent you from going. If you're in an in-person meeting, you don't blatantly start checking your emails during the middle of it. And I do think that we're all going to have to figure out how to navigate the openness of all of this for ourselves, so that we're able to be as productive as possible, but also to still feel a degree of grounded presence with one another, so that we're not all doing something else while we're supposedly together. I think that's definitely the case for meetings. And I'm guessing for students, it will be the case for the classroom. But then, of course, I mean, that's sort of a slightly more abstract thing about kind of our ways of being now. But there's more concrete drawbacks. It's certainly clear already that there's not equal access to digital technology, to reliable Wi-Fi, to quiet spaces, and there are certain students and instructors who are going to be much more disadvantaged because of having lack of access, because of digital poverty and things like that. So I think we need to bear all of that in mind. I hope that most universities are, as they're trying to figure out how to create their model for what the online classroom could look like. But we also, I hope that people are thinking long term, people like politicians, about digital connectivity as a kind of like water and electricity, as something that has to be provided to a certain level in order for people to kind of live and participate in working life.
Absolutely, especially since so many of the forums are, digital only. And again, so this is the interesting thing, this idea of boundaries and barriers shifting, and the edges of the university. I mean, we're talking from your home office to my home office in a way that we wouldn't normally. And so that, that there's more inclusion of the family space. But as you say, then there's you can't leave that at the door if that's what you want to do, if you want to actually exclude your family circumstances and move into a space that feels, quiet and or safe and or different to do your learning. I just have a couple more questions. The first one is, and again, I'm looking to try to help people who are new to all of this. Would you have any advice for somebody just starting out in online learning for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, some of the advice that I have is really broad brushstrokes. So people who are a bit further along probably need like specific tips. But my biggest things that have been the most important for me have been being creating a classroom experience. I mean, an online space that is very organized and structured. Um, because I think it's harder for students when they're doing a lot more independent learning, finding things themselves, to know exactly what it is they need to read, exactly where it is they find it, those sorts of things. So to
Yes.
kind of do less dropping students into the ocean and letting them paddle around, and more kind of being very clear and structured. Um, and then in addition to that, just really focusing on being very present in lots of different ways, being really responsive to discussion posts, to emails. I not all online instructors use video for various reasons, but I personally find it really important, powerful tool. Just little videos, especially in the early days of teaching when that was less common. I think for students it made a huge difference to feel like there was a real person on
Mhm.
the other end who was coming in and being there, and also that that person recognized them as real people. So in the videos I make, I try, obviously try to be professional and authoritative and capable, but also try to be very much myself, be the kind of person I would try to be in a physical classroom, to acknowledge the challenges that students might be having, to pick up on things that might have come up in the discussion board. And in that sense, actually, my videos, I've always found it much more effective for my purposes to create videos. I create kind of the same set of videos every year, but they change a bit, just like I give the same lectures or the same seminars every year. So in other models, doing like a really professional lecture and then having that video year on year might be great. But for the kind of work I do with smaller groups where community and a sense of togetherness is really important, I found it much more effective to do more lo-fi, but more also more personal and ephemeral kinds of sort of teaching performances online. Those are the two big things.
Great, thank you. I guess the only other question I have is, just you've got so much experience in this, but have you kind of come up, has anything happened during the lockdown so far that has changed your idea and that you will take forward to alter your teaching in the future?
Yeah, I think I'll definitely revisit this question in kind of October, November after, especially if we're doing lots more online teaching, to think about that. Um, I think one of the opportunities that's become more possible now that so many people across our entire culture are online in this way more is doing more real-time meetings, video conferences, webinars. That was something we had already been offering for a couple years at the Institute, but for various reasons, people often didn't take it up. I think they just didn't really kind of felt like it wasn't that appealing, or it might be a pain to download the software, or um, they just didn't have time to do it. And some of those barriers won't go away, like lack of time or time difference or things like that. But I think now people have become a lot more comfortable and confident with the idea of being present with someone through a screen. And of course, again, it's not the same as being present in the same room. But it needn't be fake either. If we talked to someone on the phone in the old days, just on the audio phone, we wouldn't say that we had a telephonic conversation with someone. We'd say we had a conversation, and then if people said, "Oh, did you see him in person?" You say, "Oh no, it was on the phone." So it is different, but it's not kind of different in the sense of one is real and one isn't, or one is valuable and one is infinitely inferior. So that, I think, that mind shift has been the biggest thing that's changed. And I have been reading more about lots of really interesting little tips that I just haven't thought about before. Things like starting a classroom Zoom session in breakout rooms and then going to the big group, just to
Mhm.
give people chances to talk in small groups, or other kinds of little community building, just kind of small incidental community building exercises that helps people in an online group get to know each other.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I've been kind of excited about, and why, again, I wanted to have this conversation, is because people are actually talking about pedagogy, which is something that I've been, as you know, very interested in for a long time. So thank you so much for participating today.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking me to be a part of it. It's been really fun.